Thanks, Jake, for that introduction. And it's good to see so many of my classmates from the main bar downstairs that Jake is alluding to, and Bert's. I see Walter, CP, Ian, Bruce, Marty, Chris, Les, and Martin, not to mention Pamela and a few others, that we usually discuss what I refer to as the three cornerstones of human and geopolitical interaction, or what I refer to as the axis of interaction, which also applies to the relationship between China and the US. And in addition to the classmates that are here, there are two other classmates I just want to make a special mention of, and they are the two classmates that are memorialized at the main bar downstairs, Charlie Smith, who I memorialized in my first book, Custom Made Spin, and Hugh Van Ness, who has been memorialized in this book, which is in tribute to him. Now, before I get into the three cornerstones, I would like to see how many of you also are into these three cornerstones. So I'm going to ask you to give me a showing of hands to see if you relate to the topics that I refer to as three cornerstones. One is politics. How many of you discuss politics? Quite a few. Good. How many of you discuss religion? Even more. How many of you discuss sex? Okay. I think we're going to get on fine. Now, what I said in my first book, in the introduction, which is why I raised the question about these three cornerstones, is, quote, religion, politics, and sex are the three subjects we are constantly admonished not to discuss because of the emotions and passions they each evoke. Have you ever asked yourself why? Did any of you really stop and analyze the why? The question I then pose, is it possible our religious leaders, career politicians, and their enforcers have subconsciously conditioned us not to look closer at their malfeasance? I believe religion, politics, and sex are at the root and core of today's dysfunctional world disorder and the Sino-US relationship. All we have to do to just briefly look at the history to lay the groundwork for my talk. At the end of World War II, when China fought alongside the US and defeated Japan and then got independence, Mao Zedong did want to establish diplomatic relations with the US. His overtures were rejected. In fact, his communications to Roosevelt, State Department, and the communications of the various US officials on the ground never saw the light of day. The China lobby decided that it was in the interest of America, unilaterally, by the way, without any support from Congress, to continue supporting Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan. And unfortunately for Mao and America, that precedent has worked to the disadvantage of America and China, not only over the years, but today, and is one of the root causes of today's problems. That policy was not limited to China. Ho Chi Minh was also working for the US government during World War II. He was actually working for the forerunner of the CIA. When he succeeded in his fight against France at the end of the war with Japan, he also tried to establish diplomatic relations with the US, and his overtures were also rejected. Now, why do I come back to those three cornerstones? Why were these two gentlemen's overtures rejected? And not only that, But similar political agendas took place, as Jake pointed out in his column today, in Iran. It took place in Latin America, took place in the Middle East, and in Africa. And believe it or not, it does boil down to the three cornerstones I mentioned. The politics is Mao and Ho Chi Minh and others were basically communists. And commies are not what the U.S. wants to establish diplomatic relations with. And they are also not God-fearing people. As a matter of fact, they don't believe in any religion. Where does sex come in? Basically, just screw them. We're going to do what we think is right. The point that I think is important to keep in mind is that the policy of containment and encirclement that the U.S. has embarked on for China is not going to work. It didn't work before World War I when France and Britain tried to do the same thing to Germany with Russia. America's policy of trying to basically do the same to China today with Japan and India is not going to work. America's policy of what I refer to as black gold and guns is basically irrelevant and inapplicable to the 21st century. If America and China are truly to develop a cohesive working relationship in the interest of America and China, which is a theme I harp on in all my books, then it is time to actually sit down and look at what is really of interest to China and America right now. And for that, I have gotten into Feasting Dragon and Starving Eagle. The book was written and completed in 2009. It was sent out early last year to reviewers and just released at the end of this year. And the book really, instead of about the book, it talks about food for thought, which is what I want to discuss with you today on the relationship. And when you go to the table of contents, it is not table of contents, it is actually contents on the table. And the table itself is arranged as a menu, and it starts with a cocktail hour and goes into palate cleansers, it goes into soup, Taiwanese beef noodle, it goes into main course, political cook-offs, which deals with North Korea, and then the Chinese-American chop suey. And it ends up with cool desserts, which is about water, climate change, and the environment, two areas that also need and demand U.S.-China cooperation. There are 13 chapters here. I'm just going to focus on a couple. I'm not going to get into what a lot of the other writers here have gotten into already, whether they blame the Federal Reserve for America's problems, whether they blame bankers for subprime, and all the other issues that are debated at length. What I would like to do is focus more on the U.S.-China solutions and what I think is very timely, the visit of Hu Jintao to America and what he and President Barack Obama should be discussing and the menu they should put together with the recipes they should put together for what I believe is the new world order for Asia and the world. They have to